common questions. So this is the last and final straightforward slide. So number one, does one need to pay zakat on the properties from which he receives rent? Yes, if it fulfills the prerequisites of zakat. So you receive rent from property? Yes, if it fulfills all the other conditions. Number two, is zakat compulsory on wealth that is missing after reaching the nisab? This is known as mal-dhimar, missing wealth. You had wealth, and now for some reason it's gone missing and you have no control over that wealth. If it is missing where there is no hope in retrieving it, then zakat is not compulsory. If found after 2 years, for instance, then zakat will be necessary on that year only, not on the previous years. Yes, this is known as mal-dhimar. So you don't need to give zakat on this. If you've lost it, for example, and neither on the previous years. Question 3, if one's wealth perished after the year elapses, then would zakat be necessary? So zakat is compulsory. All of a sudden, your entire wealth got stolen, or God forbid, your entire wealth got or burnt, for example. Everything, your asset got burnt, for example, or all of your money got stolen. In that case, zakat is ma'fun, you don't need to pay zakat. If, however, somebody intentionally destroyed their own wealth, then zakat will still be compulsory, okay? So if it got perished by itself, this is talking about after the year elapsed, meaning zakat is compulsory upon you now, then no, it will not be necessary. Can we pay the zakat before the elapsing of the year, knowing that there will be sahib nisab by the end? So can you pay your zakat before your zakat due date? So for example, somebody's zakat due date is in Shawwal, which is a month after Ramadan. Somebody decides, you know what, I want to pay it in Ramadan. Can you do that? Yes, if it is a complete nisab and one is certain that it will remain until the end of the year. If, however, before the zakat due date, you receive some extra £1,000 or £2,000, then that is outstanding. You need to calculate zakat for that also. Is zakat compulsory on wealth which one possesses, though she doesn't have access to it yet? If by access means that they have some control over the money, then yes. But if it is beyond their reach and lost total control, then it will not be necessary. We talked about this before. Number 6, is zakat compulsory on credit cards? If you have a credit card, you have to pay zakat on that. The answer is, if not used, then there's no zakat on to be paid on it. So if you have a credit card, let's say limit of £1,000, the bank has given it to you, you have not touched it yet, you have not used it, then there's no zakat on that because you haven't used it. Once you've used it, then the used amount is deductible from the zakat. So once you've used let's say you spent £500 from that, for example, and now you owe the bank £500, then that will be deductible from zakat, obviously within a year. The interest that's added onto that, you don't deduct that because that's not a valid loan. And this is the final slide. Can you pardon the debtor with your intention of zakat if he will not pay you? No, as the intention at the time of lending was for credit and not zakat. If at the time of lending he made the intention of zakat, then permissible. If he made the intention of zakat, then with the hope, with the thing that with this expectation that the person will not pay you, then it will be permissible. Can one purchase a Ramadan winter pack with zakat money? Yes, so long as one's individual ownership is long as there's individual ownership and not a shared ownership. So remember the example that I give, because there's shared ownership, it's supposed to be individual ownership. Okay, so jazakumullah khair for that. So I'll be kindly take your questions now. I do apologize for the length of the time. So does anybody have any questions? Okay. Okay. If I lended wealth to my brother and I have no hope of him returning in this year or in the near future, do I need to give zakat on that amount? Again, I've already talked about that, didn't I? If you know that you're not going to get it at all and there's no way that he's going to give it to you, then that zakat is now dropped because it's beyond your control. You have to be certain about it though. So with regards to rental property, is zakat paid on the market value of the property or the rent? Okay, good question. When it comes to rent, right? When it comes to receiving rent, so the house itself is not for sale, but you're obviously, that house is still yours, but you're put tenants in there. When it comes to renting, then you only pay zakat on the rent. You only calculate zakat on the market value of the property if you're buying and selling property. So this is the same with trading stock. Everything's calculated by the market value. The only time you calculate the market value of the property is that if you're buying and selling. But if it's a property that's on rent, then you're only paying zakat on the rent. So then you have to, you only pay zakat on the rent, okay? Right. Okay. Subhanallah, these questions are coming quite rapid. Okay. Uh, with regards to the rent property, okay. If you give money to a shopkeeper and say, for example, that this is my zakat money to give to the poor people, oil, then would the shopkeeper charge for the price that he sells oil for on the original price? I don't understand the question. So if you give money to a shopkeeper and say, for example, that this is my zakat money to give to the poor people, oil, then would the shopkeeper charge for the price that he sells the oil or original price of the oil? It could be the original price of the oil. It doesn't matter. So, but as long as you give me the money, you say, look, I want you to purchase oil with this and give it to the poor person individually, then that's fine, it's okay. If you use a credit card, but you have paid off the debt you owe to the bank and you pay zakat on it, no. You only pay zakat only on that money which you've used. Remember, just to be clear, that the credit card, that money belongs to the bank, isn't it? So it belongs to the bank, so you don't need to pay zakat on it at all. Once you've used the money, then that becomes deductible from your zakat asset. But the money by default in the credit card, right, that actually belongs to the bank. Okay, so my understanding is that you don't need to pay zakat at all because that's not yours to keep it. It's not like a debit card. Debit card is yours, isn't it? So if you have a credit card but you've paid off the debt you owe to the bank that you pay zakat, then you don't need to pay zakat on that. Then. So it's like this, like somebody gave a good example. A scholar gave a good example that credit card is like, let's say Zaid, for example, he has money, and Bakr basically is in need of money, but yet Zaid still has that money in his account. So obviously Zaid is still responsible for that. Okay, same thing. Even though the money is in the credit card, but that actually belongs to the bank. Okay. Okay. Can a male views credit card? Okay. If a male member can a male member pay zakat on behalf of their mother and grandmother on behalf of another family member? Good question. Can they pay zakat money? Right. The condition for paying zakat on behalf of somebody is that they have to give consent, or they're already aware of it. If you give zakat on behalf of somebody else without their knowledge, then that zakat is not fulfilled. Yes. However, if they were to agree to it, then so long as that money has not been used, then it could be valid. But otherwise, no. But you need consent though. Need consent. Any kind of form of consent, or even, for example, the grandmother knows that he's going to pay zakat on my behalf, okay, right? And then you pay zakat on behalf, then it's permissible. So main thing is consent. If I have a business and the business was £10,000, but I have £8,000 in the business account, do I pay zakat on the £10,000? Right. Okay. If this £10,000 is a short-term debt, if it's a short-term debt or it's something that's demanded immediately, then then you don't need to pay zakat on the £8,000 because of what we see, that the debt has now overwhelmed your personal saving. If it's a long-term debt, then what you do is then you deduct short-term debt and you pay zakat on the rest. Can zakat be given to a charity organization to build a house for a poor family? I've already answered that because I can't physically get to the poor people. No, I've already answered that question. No, you can't. I've talked about in detail. Student maintenance loans that are given each year, where you manage to save something from it, you give zakat on that. Again, as I mentioned about student maintenance loan, all student loans, they fall under long-term debt. So what you do is that you calculate the debt that you're going to pay within the year. That is deducted, and then you pay zakat on the rest. Assalamu alaikum, respected Sheikh. I am not a Sheikh, so please don't call me a Sheikh. So what is the ruling for zakat funds such as National Zakat Foundation and other charities which collect zakat donation and take charge of distribution based on eligibility and crisis aid? These organizations occasionally do not ensure the leak of the funds. I'm not sure. I don't know too much about the National Zakat Foundation. Okay, I'm not too familiar with them, to be honest. Okay. My past zakat is complex. Can I average it off per lunar year? Yes, you can average it. Yes, you can average it on per lunar year. Okay, so we leave it at that now. Jazakumullah khair for your participation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all for taking the time out for this.